This episode is brought to you by the Denver Art Museum. Don't miss Untitled Artist Takeover at the Denver Art Museum this Friday, January 26th from 6 to 10 p.m. Untitled is a chance to enjoy the museum after hours with Denver's own talented artists. This late night event is when things can get a little weird in a wonderful way. Visual artist Kiana Madison and musician Wes Watkins have curated the unexpected. Around every corner, you'll find interactive performances, art making stations, one night only art installations, and so much more. Did you want a list of every band that Wes Watkins has ever been in? Old Heads, Air Dubai, you'll know Air Dubai, The Other Black, Nathaniel Rateliff and the Night Sweats, Cosmic Slim, his solo project, Wheelchair Sports Camp, Venus Cruise, Petals of Spain. Get to know the art scene in a whole new way at Untitled Artist Takeover this Friday. I know I'm missing some, but those are just the ones that I can remember off the top of my head after writing about him for so many years. Reserve your tickets now at denverartmuseum.org. Today on CityCast Denver, more than 36,000 South American migrants have arrived in Denver since 2022. As hundreds come daily by the busload, the city has been pushed to the brink, providing emergency shelter, healthcare, and trying to meet their basic needs. Mayor Mike Johnston has cut department budgets and personally appealed to President Biden for help. But is there more he could do? My guest is a law professor with a really big, innovative idea that could change everything. Today is Monday, January 22nd. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Cesar Cuauhtemoc Garcia Hernandez, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here with y'all.
So Mayor Mike Johnston just got back from yet another trip to Washington, D.C., where he was calling for more federal support and a fast tracking of work authorizations for the thousands of migrants that we're seeing arriving in Denver. How do you think he's handling this crisis?
Yeah, I think he's trying to leverage all of the resources that are available to him as the mayor of a mid-sized city. He's certainly using the dollars that the city has at its disposal, trying to shake the cushions out from departments across the city to see where they can free up some cash to redirect towards assisting any of the folks who are arriving in our community. But he's also trying to pull those political levers, and so I give him credit where credit's due, which I'm not prone to do when it comes to elected officials. But in this instance, I think he's trying, and I'd like to see him do a little bit more creative thinking when it comes to the challenge that the city and all of us who live in the city of Denver are currently facing with regard to migrants. But I think he's on the right track.
Let's talk about that. These thoughts that you have. What more could be done? What is the creative thinking that Mayor Johnston could be doing?
Yeah, look, the reality is that some of these folks are not going to be eligible for work authorization. The federal government is tied. There are some laws that actually were enacted by Congress that simply limit who can get access to work authorization. For example, when folks come and they apply for asylum because they're coming to the United States because of a fear for their lives, it basically takes 6 months after they apply, not after they arrive, but after they apply for asylum, before they are even eligible to apply for a work permit, right? And during those 6 months, what do you do? What do you do? How do you live? I mean, how do you live in a city like Denver that's getting ever more expensive, right? There's nothing that the mayor of Denver or New York or any other city can do about that. Frankly, there's nothing that the Biden administration can do because that is just a federal law enacted by Congress, and it would take a federal law enacted by Congress to undo that or to alter that. And then there's folks who are eligible for work permits because of some Biden administration initiative that's specifically targeted toward folks from certain countries, like Venezuela, for example, which is highly relevant to Denver. But those have cutoff dates. If you're not here in time, then you're not going to be eligible. And so the city is left to deal with the question of what happens to the folks who are just not eligible, do not meet the guidelines to get a work authorization permit from the federal government. And that's where I think some creative thinking is perfect for the mayor's office to be heading.
So I see what you're saying. Like legally, how the laws are created or set out right now, it seems impossible. What would that creative thinking look like to break through that or do something different?
Yeah, ever since 1986, when Ronald Reagan was president, Congress enacted a law that says that private employers cannot hire people who do not have the federal government's permission to work in the United States, people who are not U.S. citizens. And ever since then, it's sort of been understood that means, okay, well, no one can hire anyone unless they have any migrant, unless they have the federal government's permission to work. The reality is that law is written pretty narrowly. The law specifically focuses on private employers, and that part's clear. Private employers, whatever private business in the city, cannot just go around hiring people unless they have proof that the federal government has let them work. But that law does not mention state governments. It does not mention local governments. And this is interesting because courts tend to emphasize the words of the laws that Congress actually enacts. The courts don't go around asking, well, what did you actually mean? What did these 535 people who voted on this law back in 1986 actually mean? What did they intend? No, what we focus on is what are the words of the text? Because in the political process that leads to the enactment of any law, there's a whole bunch of compromise, right? And here, the fact that this federal law from 1986 does not say that it applies to state or local governments, it gives an opening to a city like Denver that already hires many people, that already has budgets and personnel offices and lots of work that needs to get done in our in neighborhoods around our community, to take a creative, bold step forward and say, look, we're going to use that wiggle room. We're going to exploit that wiggle room in the federal law and start hiring some of these folks, bring them onto our own payroll, and then go from there.
So that's your big idea, really, is to interpret this idea of a private business and say the government is not that. Why doesn't the government become an employer of some of these folks arriving in Denver?
That's right. Like the same federal law that focuses specifically on private employers and says they cannot hire folks who don't have the government's permission, the federal government's permission to work, talks about local governments, talks about state governments in other parts of the law. So Congress knows how to write a law that applies to state governments. It knows how to write a law that applies to local governments, but it did not write this law with a focus to include state or local governments. And so, yeah, I think the city of Denver, other cities around the United States, could take advantage of the opportunity that Congress has given them to create work opportunities for folks, whether or not they are U.S. citizens, whether or not they have the federal government's permission to work, and then figure out, are you qualified to do whatever the job is that needs to get done.
In theory, it sounds great, but I think what are the risks for the Johnston administration if they decided to take this step?
Whole lot of political blowback.
Okay.
The mayor is a Democrat, the president's a Democrat. I would have absolutely no doubts that there would be a ton of pressure from the White House and from Congress, from high-ranking members of Congress, not to call out the Biden administration in this way. I think also the more concrete sense of blowback is a lawsuit. The Justice Department, headed by the Attorney General, who's appointed by the President, would sue the city. And so, before enacting anything like this, the city would need to be prepared for a lawsuit and ready to put its goals, its values, the desire that the mayor constantly is talking about to get these folks to work, because that's what they want to be doing. Let's put some of the city's weight behind that, and do as I hate to give too much credit to Texas Governor Greg Abbott, but he says, we'll see you in court, and he means it.
I'm thinking Johnston's also been in this office for less than a year. I mean, starting out with a lawsuit, do you think the lawsuit would be successful? I mean, what do you think that would play out like?
I don't know. I don't know whether the lawsuit would be successful. It would be the first time that any state or local government that I know of pushes the limits of this federal law in this way. The University of California, the Regents of the University of California, which is the body that controls the UC system, is thinking about, has publicly said, look, we're thinking hard about rolling out a policy like this specifically for our students. UC system has about 250,000 students across all of its campus. So we're not talking about a small town here, right? We're talking about mid-sized city, in fact. So I don't think that the Johnston administration would necessarily be hanging out on a limb by itself, but it would be an opportunity for Denver to really take the lead when it comes to migration. And one of the things that has happened over the last 7 years or so, really going back to the end of the Obama years, beginning of the Trump years, is that Denver's often sort of joined forces with other cities and other states that are led by Democrats, have a pretty liberal, if not progressive streak to them. But very, very rarely has Denver been willing to stand out there at the front, right? And this might be a nice opportunity for Denver to say, look, we're a grown-up city. We don't have to be in California. We don't have to be on the coast. We're our own place. We're not just the leader of Colorado, the leader of the Mountain West. We're a leader at the national level, and that comes with the willingness to take a punch.
This episode is brought to you by Denver Health. Denver Health is a community healthcare system providing care in more than 150 service lines, including multiple convenient urgent care locations and community clinics. And they are tackling some of our city's biggest challenges by offering substance use disorder recovery programs and free or reduced healthcare to 15,000 DPS students each year. Denver Health's expertise in trauma and emergency care services are unrivaled in Colorado and some of the best in the nation, with its 911 response team, paramedic fleet, and level 1 shock trauma center boasting a 98% survival rate. When my husband had cancer, they were amazing. Call 720-928-2127 if you're interested in making an appointment at Denver Health. Again, that number is 720-928-2127.
I'm Mo Rocca, and I'm excited to announce Season 4 of my podcast, Mobituaries. I've got a whole new bunch of stories to share with you about the most fascinating people and things who are no longer with us. From famous figures who died on the very same day, to the things I wish would die, like buffets. All that and much more. Listen to Mobituaries with Mo Rocca wherever you get your podcasts.
You brought up this situation happening in the school system in California with a similar situation where they're trying to utilize this. They're trying to create jobs, or at least opportunities for jobs for students who are undocumented, because there has been pushback to that as well. George Fishman's a senior fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies and a former Department of Homeland Security official wrote, quote, "Their contention that the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986's ban on knowingly hiring or employing immigrants unauthorized to work in the U.S. doesn't apply to state government entities skims over the fact that violations of the law carry civil as well as potential criminal liability and have resulted in imprisonment." Do you think that's a real concern?
Right. First off, the Center for Immigration Studies is what the Southern Poverty Law Center calls a hate group, right? So I think it's important to keep in mind that this is a very virulent anti-migrant organization. Now, that said, I'm not just going to attack the messenger. I'll also deal with the message, right? Which is that it's illegal to do this. My point is it doesn't apply to state and local governments. If we were talking about a private employer, right? Any private business down federal, sure, I would agree. There are criminal consequences. There are potential civil consequences as well. We're not, and that's my point. Is this law does not apply to state and local governments, and therefore they wouldn't face those consequences. Now, if they go to court, they lose the battle, and then they do it anyway. All right, then you've got problems on your hand. I'm not suggesting that. I'm a lawyer. I'm a law professor who teaches students about who teaches the next generation of students. Right. I deeply respect the outcomes of judicial proceedings. I also am well aware that when there is wiggle room, there is somebody out there willing to take advantage of that opportunity when your values point you in that direction. And this is what we see from Republican leaders of states like Texas and Florida on a regular basis. They're exploiting a little bit of wiggle room, often with the support of organizations like the Center for Immigration Studies, and enacting a really broad-based policies that really make life harder for migrants. We see in Texas that their Texas National Guard is literally facing off against Border Patrol agents, keeping Border Patrol agents from accessing the border. We're seeing that the state of Texas is deploying, barbed wire along the river, right? They've decided that there's some wiggle room in the law there. They've gone to court. I would hope that if they end up losing, that they will abide by those directives. And I would hope the same for the city government of Denver or any other city government. Only here, what I'm advocating is a policy that is much more welcoming toward migrants rather than what we see in places like Texas and Florida.
What I'm hearing a lot is this is a lot about interpretation. And I think that that's something that we talk about with laws in America all the time. It's a lot about interpretation and challenging that interpretation.
Lawyers are nothing if not wordsmiths. Right? Our job is to figure out what the law says, figure out what it does not say, and then try to advocate on behalf of our clients, right? And the city is essentially, the constituency is the community, right? The people who make this such a vibrant place. And so if there is the political pressure on the Johnston administration, then perhaps the political will follow. And I think that's something that only time will tell.
What about the purpose of that 1986 law you're talking about? Which I'm thinking of this like familiar conservative argument, like people say, but those are our jobs, like Denverites are already struggling. Would this make it harder for them?
Right. I think so. Economically, like the Denver economy is not a pie that doesn't ever expand. Right. It's a robust, flexible, dynamic sort of entity that contracts and expands. The more people we have working, the more people we have buying. Right. There's no shortage of economic data that suggests that introducing more migrant workers into a community also introduces more migrant consumers into a community, and that wealth then gets spread. I think the more fundamental question is one about values, right? What does it mean to say, we are a community that welcomes migrants, that we are a community that is in part constructed by migrants, not just migrants today, but migrants of generations past. I live on the north side. The north side is a part of the city of Denver, right, that has a rich tradition of housing group after group of immigrants that have come to this part of the United States to make it the place that so many of us love and that so many people are currently flocking to. And I think for any elected official, it's a question of how do you pull the levers that are available to you as a leader, economically, financially, politically, legally, to make those values reality. And I think this is one opportunity that is available to the Johnston administration that they haven't yet turned to. And I would hope that they would think seriously about doing so.
I guess ultimately, if the mayor doesn't take this bold step that you've proposed or this bold risk, what do you think could happen?
Well, I think he's going to earn a lot of frequent flyer miles going back and forth from Washington to Denver, complaining more about how we need more work permits. I think it's just going to mean that migrants who are already here are going to start working. It's just that they're going to be working without work authorization. In that sense, they're going to be the most recent group of migrants in Denver and in every city in the United States who doesn't have the federal government's permission to work, but is working nonetheless. And we all know what that means. It means they're more easily exploitable, they're paid less, and it's harder for folks then to stand up on their feet and become sort of the self-sustaining, self-reliant people that most of us want to be.
Well, you have this new book. I'd love for you to tell us about what the book is about and a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Welcome the Wretched in Defense of the Criminal Alien. It comes out on January 30th, and I'll be at TED Cover speaking about it on Colfax on February 1st. The book is really a call to point out how this narrative that Republicans and Democrats can never agree on anything when it comes to immigration policies is wrong. Republicans and Democrats for decades have agreed that anyone who runs up against the criminal legal system is unfit for life in the United States, that we ought to wield the federal government's immigration law enforcement resources against them, to try to imprison them and deport them. And the book really points out the fact that this is no different from what many of us find in our own lives and our own families. We're all a bunch of imperfect, flawed people. Our imperfections change, but the one thing that's constant is imperfection. We're a community of people who celebrates folks who have committed genocide and all kinds of violence in the name of some kind of glory and heroism and economic activity. And so to look at migrants these days and say, well, you messed up, is to deny that reality not only of ourselves individually, but of the community. And so I'm really putting forth an argument that crime should have no bearing when it comes to who gets to make a life in the United States, because we are, after all, just a community full of people who mess up every single day.
Well, we'll put a link in the show notes for folks that want to come and check out your conversation with our friend of the show, Senator Julie Gonzalez. Cesar, thank you so much for joining me.
It was a pleasure to be here.
That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell Texas Governor Greg Abbott about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you later. My favorite part is this ghost bus idea. Like, a bus just showed up. Well, someone was driving it. Did anybody ask them? They'll be like, oh man, this like grizzly Texan man hanging out at the bus depot named Greg Abbott just sent me to Denver.
Mysterious governor appeared out of the mist.
And he was like, take this bus to Denver. Take this bus to Denver City. Oh, wait, there is actually a Denver City, and it's not us.